Well, Jai Baba, all of you, thank you for coming and taking an interest in this subject. We're doing this without a microphone, so if you have any trouble hearing, let me know. I can project, I think, when I remember to. So this is, the subject is this new book that you can see the cover of, Creation and Its Causes. Meherababa's Lectures to the Meher Ashram Boys, 1927 to 28. This is a book, sometimes people say, to me, your book. It's not. This is, Meherabad is the author. The Avatar Meherabad Trust was given copyrights to most of Baba's material, including unpublished. And this is designated as a work of Meherabad's authorship. I've been involved in editing it for a long time. So, this is going to be coming out supposedly on August 30th. Have you heard anything more about that, Cassandra?
No, still the 30th.
So in about a week or a few days, from Sherrier Foundation, and it's
They're going to start shipping from the 30th. Already they're packing the book.
okay. They'll start shipping from the 30th.
The
Okay.
30th, yeah.
Yeah.
They
So
hired extra people to help with the shipping.
Yeah. They
Yeah.
have
So
somebody
many
who is
people.
working with them.
yeah, okay. So this is really a major book. It's not some slight thing at all. I've been, as Lois said, I've been working in this area ever since I moved to India, 1993. And I really do think this is a book of major significance, no doubt about it. And it's quite startling in its contents. The core of it is a series of talks that Meher Baba gave to the boys of the Meher Ashram. The Meher Ashram was a boarding school. I'll say more about this presently, but that Baba established in 1927. And it was out of this group that the Prem Ashram happened. Probably more of you have heard of the Prem Ashram. Well, they were actually members of the Meher Ashram, and because of what happened during this exact period, it became impossible for them to continue going to classes. They were having such high-order spiritual experiences that they were kind of selected into their own group. But they remained a part of the Meher Ashram. So these are talks to the boys of the Meher Ashram from 2nd December 1927 until the 14th of January 1928, over a 6-week period. That's not all that there is in this book, but that's, I would say, the heart and soul of it is that. And actually Cassandra has set up, we did a lot of Zoom presentations, and they include a reading of these 34 lectures in their entirety. And you can go on YouTube and listen to them all if you want. We did it because the book is supposed to come out last December, and then it was supposed to come out in February. But it's a difficult book to produce. So we wanted to have it accessible in some form. So that would be found, where would that be found?
Creation and Its Causes on YouTube.
Creation and Its Causes on
They have the
YouTube.
channel, so it's easy to find.
Yeah, there's a channel there. There are like 16 sessions, is that right?
18.
Huh?
18.
18 sessions.
18.
And there's an A and a B. The first of each of them is reading it, and the second is discussing it. So a number of people have watched those. But I want to say that what we're doing here is going to be quite different than that, because I'm going to be giving a kind of introductory presentation to its material. In the course of this, I think it works better you know, if questions do come up, I think it's better if we have some interactivity, or otherwise my sound of my voice will help you make up for what sleep you missed last night. And you didn't register. If you want to take a nap, you have to register specially for that nap time.
Where do I sign up?
Then Lois will provide you with a cot. I hope you haven't drunk any coffee. Yeah. So do chime in. I do want to stick to this book, though. So if questions or topics would go too far from that, they're really the thing really is to come to an appreciation and understanding of what Baba did give here. And I think at this point, I'm not the only one, because for 25 years I was working on this in this strange cocoon of isolation. And now that's ending because other people are seeing it. And I think others would agree with me who have encountered it that it's mind-blowing stuff. It really is. It's quite, I mean, if you're able to enter into kind of this vision of things, the philosophical, mystical vision of things, it's quite startling. What Baba gave to these boys was not, even though they were 10 to 16, 10 to maybe a little bit older, Svendir might have been 17, I forget, but that age group, it was not the kind of fare at all that you would expect for boys like that. It was extraordinarily revelatory. I always like, there's a Persian word, kashf, right? Yeah, I mean, it gets used all the time. But this really, it's an unveiling or a revealing. This really was that. It really was. And he gave many, I don't know, insights is too weak, visionings, you could say, of themes and ideas that he had never told the Mandali that I know of, and some of which he never explained again. So it's quite amazing what he told them. And equally amazing was how they responded. This part, some of you may be acquainted with if you've read Ramju Abdullah's book, Sobs and Throbs, is all about this. And also some of the Premashram boys would talk about it, like Asfendiar would, and there are some others. But what happened was that they went love mad. These boys went, a lot of them did. In fact, on January 1st, 1928, from the very beginning of all of this, you see, none of the Mandali had any idea that this would happen. Who could? Who would imagine such a thing? But they were noticing that there was this thing where some of them would burst out weeping. And then on January 1st, the whole school began, all 150 of them, began to weep uncontrollably. And the Mandali's like, what do we do about this? And, you know, you could hear them from a quarter mile away. You know, it's just wailing and weeping like their whole families had died and they just couldn't control themselves. And when Baba began his talk that night, instantly the whole thing became completely quiet. And that went on for several days. And then the school as a whole kind of normalized. But there were certain ones among them. Ali is the one who's the main character in Sobs and Throbs, but there were certainly others who began to experience the higher planes. In fact, one of them, Abdullah Pakravan, is that how I say his name?
Yes.
Okay. Actually began to experience the sixth plane of consciousness, the direct sight of God. And there's another Rajaram having very high order experiences. And that really launched the whole story of the Premashram. which some of you may know. That kind of comes after this series of talks. But the thing is, this series of talks was exactly when that happened, right over this period of time. And they had contact with Baba. Baba was basically in seclusion for most of the time, to most people. But the boys would have contact with him. But this was a major contact, actually. Baba would give these talks every night from, say, 7 or 7:30 for about an hour. There were, the boys would be ranged around him at these sessions. And here's another striking feature of these talks, if you know the historical background, which I've been alluding, is that the talks are not on the subject of love at all. To the they're on, we don't have good English words for this, but the highest of high philosophy, creation cosmology, astronomy. There's the stuff on astronomy he gave that's most peculiar, evolution. And then he gave a big account of the involutionary journey that has stuff you will never find in God Speaks. In God Speaks and discourses, we hear about the planes of consciousness, right? I mean, I presume probably in an exalted group like LA, most of you are on one or the other. But since you're good spiritual aspirants, you would not have gotten diverted onto the asmans. Those are skies. And that's what he explains. There's a whole parallel structure in the inner worlds. There are the planes and the asmans, or skies. And he gave a full description, a fairly extensive description of those, which, I mean, he didn't tell that to people before, and he didn't after either. So it's quite remarkable. And once again, with exalted community like LA, I'm sure all your students are like this, but he told this to them over about 5-6 days, and within 2 weeks, a bunch of them were up there. So I'm sure all your LA students are just like that. You say, okay, Charlie, up to the 4th plane. And Charlie says, yes, sir. Well, I'm being facetious, but that's what happened, actually. So it's something most extraordinary that was going on. And this book presents these lectures, but there's more too, because there's an introductory 80-page historical account of this period, because you really do need to know what was going on to get it. But I said that the talks are not at all on the subject of love, but there's a serious qualification to that. At the end of them, almost always, Baba, after talking on these wildly cosmological topics, Baba would say, okay, now forget all these explanations. What I want you to focus on is to create L-O-V-E, create prem. That's the Persian word for, Indic word also for love. Create prem. And he also said, he didn't hide it at all, love me. He made it clear who he was, that he was a real, he would usually say Sadhguru in those days, and he was saying, real Sadhgurus are almost impossible to find, but you have the incredible good fortune of being in the presence of one. Don't miss this opportunity. So he was not hiding the fact that he was a Sadhguru and that he was the object of their love. And what's also most extraordinary is, as this December 29th, remember January 1st was when the place blew up with a big love bomb. But on December 29th, like 3 days before that, Baba pretty well told them that he was the avatar. And that's not something that he was saying at all. There had been a few hints of it. Maharaj said it, and a few hints here and there, but he was basically presenting himself as a Sadguru at that time. But he pretty well told them he was the avatar. So this is a remarkable phase of Baba's work, quite unlike anything else. In 1929, he basically closed it down for the most part, except for a few Premashram boys he kept with him. And then soon thereafter, he went to the West, and the whole character of his work changed completely. For the most part, these Meherashram boys went home, and most of them never came back. A few did, or some came back much, much later, or I know Irwin, Charlie is working with Irwin Luck, videotaped some of them, so it's not like they had forgotten about Baba. But Baba basically told them, "You're not in my circle." He had been talking a lot about his circle to the Mandali, and he basically told them, "You're not in my circle, but with some of you, I may have special work." So my personal opinion is that this was a special group of souls who have a special role in the avatar's work. And when it was done, it was done. And then he went on to other things. So this is right at the core of it, these very talks. Now, a lot of us have heard a lot about the Meherashram and Premashram, the history of it, right, from Sobs and Throbs and Asfendiar and others, the few others who veterans of the Premashram who came back. But what we have never heard before is what Baba was telling them, what his talks were about. And now this is coming out. I think this is a most extraordinary body of material. And I would be very surprised if anything like it comes out after this, unless the book is found and that gets published. I could be surprised, but I would be surprised. I think this is maybe the last thing of its kind. So here's what the cover looks like. I'm going to read a little bit from this. Can you read it? It's a little hard to read. Is it too small?
Yeah, too small.
Okay. Anyway, I'll read it from here. Meher Baba's 34 lectures to the Meher Ashram boys in 1927-28, which comprise the heart and core of this book, give as visionary an account of the Silent Master's philosophy and teachings as can be found anywhere in the body of his published writings. Broadly speaking, the subject matter is what Baba later called the divine theme, right? You know that, the story of the journey's soul from creation to God realization. That is the story of the soul's journey from the moment of creation to God realization. Yet the strange, vivid, poetic stream of Meher Baba's exposition proves the vehicles for many startling new ideas and perspectives that we do not find in God Speaks or other later books. And this is another characteristic of these talks. I dare say many of you have read God Speaks, and of those who have, many would probably share in the view that parts of it are difficult. Would you agree? Yeah, parts especially. And
Speak for yourself.
huh? Oh. Yeah. And if any of you have been so bold as to venture into infinite intelligence, I dare say you might have the same perspective on that. Well, here's the interesting thing about these talks. The subject matter is extraordinarily deep and startling, and it has ideas that are kind of knock you for a loop a bit. But The language is not difficult at all, actually. The sentences are short. And also, it's rather poetic and vivid. One might, I've been working on it for 25 years, so I might have many a time. Yeah.
Ward, I'm not sure if you're taking questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
When Baba would give these talks, he was, of course, silent. And so am I correct that he had a pile of little chalkboards that he would write sentence by sentence on?
Yeah. I'll come back to this in a minute,
yeah.
but he wasn't writing then. This was alphabet board days.
Oh, he was already on the alphabet.
He was on the alphabet
Okay.
board, yeah. But I'll say more about the actual context
Yeah.
of this in a minute. No, that's an important part of the whole thing. Yeah. So where was I? What was I talking about? I've forgotten now.
25 years.
I've been, yeah.
Godspeed.
You're
Yeah,
talking
yeah,
about
yeah.
intelligence.
God speaks infinite intelligence. Short sentences.
Yeah, that's right. So I've, for naturally, since I'm the editor of this book, I played that role. I couldn't help but ask the question, would, young teenage boys understand this, As the language is not hard, but the ideas are most extraordinarily profound. And I'll just tell you what I think. It's just my opinion. I think that Baba's, and in fact Ramju Abdullah said he was the one who came up with this title, Creation Its Causes. It's his suggested title. He said something like this. I think when Baba presented it, it was so vivid that they got it. That's what I think. Now, they may not have been able to remember it afterwards. I think they probably couldn't. It's too weird, a lot of it. And they're kids, so I don't think they could have recalled it. But I don't think, just my own opinion, I don't think that mattered. I think, personally, Baba was doing some kind of archetypal, universal work. And what he had to do was make that connection with these boys at that moment. And with that accomplished, his work was done. That's my opinion. And, Baba would, I wish I could imitate his gestures, but Mani could do that to a certain extent, but basically he's inimitable. But Baba, like one of the big ideas is hollowness in this book. Pokol is one of the words for it, or akash, pokol, let's say. And you might say hollowness is an abstract idea, right? Well, I think Baba, I don't know what he would do, but he would somehow make a gesture, and you would totally get it. Totally get hollowness. Like hollowness is kind of wanting something to fill its hollowness. Or let's say a bubble. He would probably do something and you would just get it. So I think they got it. And in fact, Ramju Abdullah he said that pretty well. It brought them right, okay, I'll give my rendering of what his idea. I think he brought them right to the verge of where they could practically see this themselves, directly, right on the edge. And then right after that, a bunch of them went over the edge and went up to the plains. So I think some kind of extraordinary archetypal work on all of humanity was going on. And that's why he was able to give them talks like this. Okay. Let me switch this. Should I read this? I might switch to the screen because I can't make it big enough where people can read. So maybe this afternoon we'll go to the screen. But let me read a little bit of this to give an idea of the book. Despite having been addressed to an audience of teenage boys, Meher Baba's cosmological account in these lectures is nothing short of revelatory. Early talks in the series explain the origins of creation through the clashing of pran and akash. These are going to be big terms here, pran and akash. Energy and space. This creation narrative unfolds a strange landscape of light globes and shadows and reflections, oceans and waves and drops and bubbles. That's some of the imagery he's using here. Later talks illumine esoterics of the spiritual path, especially in the relationship between the planes of consciousness and the associated skies or asmans. Asman is a Persian word, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Means sky, right?
Yeah.
This book also publishes 6 major discourses Meherabad gave to his mandali, right? So it's not just these 34 talks. There's always also a section of 6 talks to the mandali during the same period that have never been seen before. Along with a detailed history of his work with the Hazrat Babajan School, the Meher Ashram, and the Prem Ashram between 1925 and 1929. And maybe in the last session I'll say something about this. As a critically edited text, Creation and Its Causes surveys manuscript sources and unravels many of their textual knots. Appendices on evolution and astronomy, a full glossary, index, and more than 40 color figures. You can see some of them here. Round out an unparalleled exposition on the sources and causes of the world we see before our eyes. I'll say something about this in our last session on Sunday, but I'll say this much now, that this is a critical edition. I realize that most people don't work in this field and might not know what this is or care very much, but I do think a lot of Baba lovers would care about this. They, people would ask, are these really Baba's words? Right? I think a lot of people do care about that question. And this doing of a critical edition is meant very specifically to address that and to give all evidence and materials for anyone interested in it. Now, most people will not go that far with it, but I do think it matters with the words of the Avatar that when things are published attributed to him, that there be backing to that. This has been done. That's why part of why the whole thing took so long. Now, we have 4 sessions here. Let me just show you a glimpse of, oops, I didn't open the right thing. 1 second, I have to open the proper file. Right here. Okay, here we go. It's going to be it. Okay. Well, you can get an impression of it, but I wanted to print this out. Maybe you can get this printed out and handed out for the participants of this. But this is describing what these sessions are about. This whole thing gives a introduction to the context. In fact, I'm going to read this much. You really can't read it, can you?
Or this is available on Meherabad website.
Okay, the Meherabad website has it.
So it has it. So even if people like to look at it through their cell phone, they can.
Okay,
iPhone.
okay.
But I got a lot. I know the content and the syllables are all
Okay.
available on this.
Okay, so that's available, yeah.
Or if you want to expand that, but we can read it, but if you want to expand, you do Control+. The plus is on the very top functions. You want me to do it?
You know, I've got this PowerPoint set up. I think it might be too difficult.
It's actually off, it's not. connected
Control
to
plus?
Yeah, Control+. There, it expanded it total.
It sort of goes, I'm glad you know that.
All right, good.
Of course, it kind of
Yeah, exceeds
bursts
that.
of...
It doesn't fit the screen now.
But okay, I'm going to read from the second paragraph because this gives you some idea of these talks. In an opening sequence, Baba explained creation cosmology, whose central narrative highlighted the clashing of Pran and Akash. Right, you haven't, I dare say, readers of Baba's books have not seen all that much about Pran and Akash. It turns out to be a huge part of his cosmological account. Movement and space. This clash erupted in and gave birth to a universe of light globes and shadows and reflections. Going to see a light globe. This is depicts a light globe, this right up here. This comes up later on. Oceans and waves and drops and bubbles. Where's the ocean? Waves, drops, bubbles. Yeah, here we are. That's what this is showing. There are a lot of these figures that show this. Which Baba interpreted in terms of the interactions of knowledge and ignorance. These are some of the major themes now in the earlier part. After a truly mystifying group of 3 lectures on planetary ranges, light globes, and the world's moons and suns, which come out of them, Baba went on to provide an account of the evolution of form and consciousness. Of course, that's in God Speaks, but there are themes and perspectives here that are quite new. With the 5 turns of the human form in evolution, and 4 elements as special highlights. Finally, over the culminating 2 or 3 weeks, that would be from the end of December until January 14th, 1928, Baba went on to provide an account of the, Baba depicted the inner worlds and involutionary path in ways that you will not find in God Speaks and Discourses. At the center of Baba's vision here is the relation between the plains and the skies, or asmans, each of which Baba described vividly and identified by its Persian name. And the overall plan, okay, I'll read this too, even though this is, I've mentioned it, but I think it's useful to, while these talks were remarkable enough in themselves, no one would have anticipated the effect that they produced. The boys went mad with love. Midway through the lecture sequence, the entire student body suddenly began to weep uncontrollably for hours and days at a time. Over the weeks that followed, several of them were precipitated into the experience of the inner planes of consciousness. The great stories and dramas that flowed from this will be familiar to readers of Ramju Abdullah's history of the Meherashram, Sobs and Throbs. Have any of you read Sobs and Throbs? Yeah, it's really worth reading. It really is. It's probably out of print, but you can find it on the Avatar Meherabad Trust website.
There's also the volume called Ramju's Diaries.
Yeah, there is that. You know, in the editing of it, for that, certain parts got cut out. And one of them was a description of this series of talks. So I'm glad that I was reading from the full thing, because Ramju gives a full-page description of these talks to the Meherashram boys. And it's there that he proposes the title, Creation and Its Causes.
Was he there? I know he was in Manzulamin, but was he in Prem Ashram or Meherashram?
I don't see references to him in person, but he was one of the Mandali, and he would come and go all the time. So I think he was basically there. You know, I don't know if he was there for every session, but it wouldn't surprise me because he describes it in a way that really gives the impression that he knew vividly what was going on. Ramju Abdullah, do you guys, if you're not acquainted with that name, that was one of the early Mandali and one of the really great Mandali. Muslim. He and Ghani were chums. Abdul Ghani was another one from that period. So if you go on the Meherabad website, you'll see this, and so I won't read this all through, but this is describing the major topic areas, and they are this. This morning, which is, can you see the laser pointer at all?
Yeah.
Basically, after this introduction, we'll be looking at the history of the period and a little bit of the manuscript sources for it. And this afternoon's session, Creation Cosmology, is going to look at the first series of lectures that deal with topics like the creation of the universe, light globes, oceans and drops and waves. There's a lot more to this than you would think, I'll tell you. Also this strange astronomical account with the light globes and suns and planets and moons and evolution, topics of that sort. And tomorrow morning we'll go into Baba's account of the involutionary journey, the planes and asmans. The asmans, as I say, is what's new, a new information. And that might spill over until tomorrow afternoon, but I'm also in the afternoon going to get a bit to these six discourses to the Mandali that Baba gave, which, as I say, are quite new. People haven't seen them before. So there's a lot of new and original material in this. So that's a picture of what I'm envisioning. Any questions or points you want to bring up right now? Anybody? Yeah.
Besides Shamji and Ramji, weren't there other Mandali keeping diaries down the street that you've come across?
Yeah, there were some. There's no indication that they were keeping diaries of this, but there were others. I think my impression is by this time, that would be 27, 28, Chanji had really emerged as the diarist, and other people mostly let him do it.
Yeah.
Do you know Chanji? Framrose Dada Chanji is his full name. And he first met Baba in 1924 and became one of his Mandali. And until his death, I always forget if it was 1944 or 1943. It was
I think 44.
44. The memorial tower.
Was every secretary.
Yeah, he was Baba's secretary and a very assiduous diarist. And his diaries for this period are particularly copious. So I've studied all of those, and that's part of the work for this. So he was the main one by that time. The others, I think, it looks like they kind of said, okay, Chanji's doing it. Yeah.
In my mind, I'm thinking that there was Dr. Chanji on the one hand, and then there was also Dr. Deshmukh. And am I correct that Dr. Deshmukh was majorly involved in the putting into text of Baba's discourses?
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
He was not a diarist, but he was a professor of philosophy and a serious writer. Chanji, I don't think, had any pretensions to being a prose stylist. And he wasn't. He was a good basic writer, whereas Deshmukh would actually write up essays. But Deshmukh was not in the picture yet. He came in 1934. So this was very early on. K.J. Dastur, I don't know. Yeah, you guys, some of you, he was became the editor of the Mayor Message, which was a monthly magazine. He was there by then. So there were others. There were certainly other Mandali who were very interested in this material. It wasn't just Ramju and Ghani, not at all. And there were others who weren't interested in the least. Hindu being a prime candidate for that. He couldn't stand this stuff. So Baba's Mandali had a range, but there were certainly some. Okay, let me give you a little bit of a history, because that will be relevant to this.
Ward, I'd like to also add that besides if people are interested to get more idea about some of these lectures in more simpler manner or more basic foundation, also this period is covered in Lord Meher.
Yeah,
Mostly in the, Lord Mayor online.org that is available, but between 1927 to 1929
yeah,
is covered. In fact, that Prana Nakash Baba, a simplified version of it is there.
yeah, there'll be snippets. Those
Exactly,
are
snippets. Yeah.
snippets from these lectures do
Yeah,
appear.
yeah, it's there too.
Yeah, yeah. No, you'll find a good historical account there also. Yeah.
I have a housekeeping question. How do these sessions work? I mean, are we splitting up or you'll be talking about these different topics?
I'll mostly be talking, but if you've got questions, you can chime in.
Oh, okay. Got it.
As I say, I
When
do-
I see topics, I'm like, yeah, we're gonna go talk to each other about it. But you'll be doing the talking and you're gonna give us a break in the middle.
I have an outline to cover a range of topics. By the way, a book like this, I appreciate that the LA group was interested to have 2 full days on it and everything. But the fact is, you can barely scratch the surface. But it can give an idea of it, I think, and some main themes. It's going to take generations, really, for people to really assimilate this. But I will say this, a bunch of people are already really starting to look at it, and they really are. And I think when the book comes out, it's going to change our picture quite a lot.
So we'll be hearing this on the daily news and so forth.
Yeah, that's right, that's right. You're saying,
Don't be surprised.
we haven't succeeded in creating, what is it? Energy from hydrogen yet? Isn't that the deal?
Yeah, electron.
Fusion or?
Well, fusion,
Yeah.
fusion. But we're going to create energy by clashing prana and akash.
It already happened. That's
We
why
can at
we're
least
here.
create some confusion.
Yeah, confusion. But the prana and akash, man, that's like dynamite. They'll get that from me. So the book as a whole, I know that it's a little bit hard to read, but I will show it anyway. Here's the table of contents. So okay, actually I could expand this a bit. We can see a little bit. There's introductory matter, but part 1 there, if you can see it up there, is Meher and Prem Ashram's a short history. That's mostly what we'll be doing for the rest of this morning's session, which runs from 1925 to 1929, that period of time. And then the next section, and as I say, this part 2 is really the heart and core of the book. It's Creation and Its Causes is the name of this section too. These are the 34 talks Baba gave to the Mir Ashram boys, December, January 1927 and 28. So that's definitely the most important part. And you can see they're all organized by date, right? Monday, 12th December, etc. Then the next section is this one, Explanations Given by Meher Baba to the Mandali. These are these 6 lectures or discourses, and they're all dated also. And they're right from the very beginning of this period. That is from late November 1927, running through December 10th, 1928. So I decided to include this content too, because it's relevant to it. They're very interesting in their own right, obviously. And then the supplement is all full of kind of for people who really want to go into depth into various things. There's a long essay on the sources. Anyone interested in this? The manuscripts used, what they're like, what their content is, diaries, all this stuff. Also, there are some appendix 2 and 3 Themes 2 is themes and textual cruces in the story of evolution. I think there's stuff coming out on Baba's account of the evolution of consciousness that gives us a clearer picture of many issues in his account. So this goes over a lot of that. For example, some people may be acquainted with Baba's idea of the 5 turns in evolution. That is, Baba says the human form is latent from the beginning of evolution, even in stone form, but it goes through 5 turns, like somersaults, so to speak. Well, this says a lot more about that, things like that. And then Appendix 3 is mystical astronomy and the processional of the planets. There's most strange material about astronomical matters here. Yeah, Rosie, did you want to say something? Or? Yeah, Rosie wants to settle this matter of astronomy for once and for all.
Let's do it.
And then also, there are endnotes. I know we're not going to be going into this here, but I just want to say, for people who really want to say, well, what did Baba really say? What are your sources here? All the sources are going to be on the Trust website. And whenever there were significant questions about what it meant and how it's been edited, they're all dealt with there. I mean, there's like 80 pages of them, and they're very dense. So for people who want to inquire into that, all of that is there. And also, I'm just going to mention the glossary. The reason why this might be of interest to some people is people say, well, what were Meher Baba's words actually? Which is a big question. These words are handwritten in because they're not English. And almost assuredly, Baba used these words. And some of this vocabulary is very rich and evocative, much more than the English translation words are. You know, these vocabularies of, Persian and Arabic and Urdu and Sanskrit. And as a former English professor, I suffer from a severe inferiority complex. So the only solution is, in the tried and true tradition, is just to raid these languages and bring them into English. So these glossaries might be of interest to people who want to go deeper into all these matters.
Also, weren't these lectures were taught by different, like at least 3 languages, like Farsi and...
Yeah, so I'm going to be coming to that right now. I'm going to go over some of the history of all of this. Here it begins. Let me show you in the book. This is a picture of one of the classrooms. Anybody know who the guy on the right was? You happen to know him?
Khosrow Afzari.
That's right, Afzari, who was called Rausa at the time.
Yeah.
He was one of the very prominent mandali in this phase of Baba's work. In fact, he may have been more central than anybody else in this particular part. Yeah. So this whole section gives a history. That there is, of course, you recognize the guy on top, right? So that's Ali, Aga Ali, who's the hero of Sabz and Thrabs. And this is Ramju Abdullah, looking very dour at the moment. He always did tend to look rather serious. But Sabz and Thrabs is not like that at all. Okay, so this gives a history of it. This is what Lower Meherabad looked like in those days. Very barren, no trees, nothing there. So Baba first came to Meherabad in 1923. There's going to be a big event in Meherabad next year, by the way, May 1923. Perfect time. It's like 104 every day. If you stay...
May?
May is the peak of the summer, yeah. So if you stay out in the sun, you can have sunstroke and find out what that's like. But Baba went there the first time then, and that's a whole long history of early Meherabad, but he would come back from time to time over the next 2 years. And in 1925, end of January, Baba settled into Meherabad for what's called the first long stay, which ran from January 1925 until November 1926, or about 18 months or so. And so many things happened. This is a huge story in its own right. He started a hospital and a leper asylum, and pilgrims started to flood in, all sorts of dealings with the village of Erangel. Fascinating story. But what's relevant to us here, and this is one of the things I'd like to sort out, because there seems to be universal confusion in the Baba world about the different institutions Baba created. He created what's called the Hazrat Babajan School. Now, right off, let me say, the Hazrat Babajan School and the Hazrat Babajan High School are completely different. They're not the same institution at all. They're very importantly different. So this was just the Hazrat Babajan School, which was basically for, mostly for the kids of Erangel village. How many have been to India? How many here? Many, many. I mean, to Meherabad. Well, Erangel village is like practically adjoining Meherabad, quarter of a mile away. And it was a very poor, decrepit village, decrepit even by Maharashtrian standards. The caste system was still strongly in place, and there are basically three major castes: the Brahmins, the Marathas, as they're called, and then the untouchable castes, Monks and Mahars. And they were quite separate, and there was a definite social hierarchy there. So anyway, this is Peter, Nordina, and I right now are working on the major diary of this period called the Combined Diary. When that comes out, there'll be a lot more on this. But Baba set up a kind of a basic education school for these kids. And
1925?
1925, March 1925, he opened it. And it ran throughout the first long stay. And, you know, it's hard, when you say these words, they don't sound like much, but Baba was really serious about giving them a good education. Yeah. He really was. And, you know, the teachers, he would really make basic things like reading and arithmetic, really simple things like that, yeah?
So initially, the students at Hazrat Babajan School first saw the voice.
Wow! The first copy.
This is the very first copy off the print run, which was finished yesterday, and they overnighted it here.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Avatar Meherabad ki jai! Jai! Avatar Meherabad ki jai! Well, it first appears at the LA Center. How about that? Wow, wow.
What was it, please?
Huh?
Was it just like
I got a good picture of you too.
Thank you.
That's fantastic. Wow.
Did you know you were in hospital?
Yeah, I knew. I didn't say anything.
That's Baba's surprise.
It is. I didn't think it was coming for another bunch of days, so they sent it special, huh?
Yeah.
Isn't that nice? Isn't that nice?
They actually called me earlier this week and said, you know, we're just trying to arrange it so that, you know, it shows up.
Right in the middle of the first
And I didn't want to
session.
say anything because, you know, you never know.
Right, right. Oh, isn't that fantastic?
Pre-ordering, I mean, can I get one?
I know I'm biased, but I just think that this book is a thing of beauty. I really do think so. I mean, if you look at some of those figures and all that stuff.
How long did it take Nadia to come and you to do all the diagrams?
About a year and a quarter or so.
Wow.
We worked 4 days a week.
4 days a week.
Yeah. No, it was a huge project. Yeah.
Huge.
So the whole first part of it is on the history. And again, I do encourage people, anyone interested, it's really worth knowing about this, because the picture of Baba's work with education is really interesting. I mean, there's a real pattern
There you go.
seen in retrospect. In fact, I'm sort of, is there a couple copies, huh?
Yeah.
Ah, isn't that?
Can I
Wow.
open it? No. I know.
Do you know when we started this?
It has a cover.
1997.
You had the manuscript then?
How many pages?
750 or so. So
Ooh, that keeps us going.
you get a lot for you. It's expensive, but you get a lot for your money. Yeah. Yeah.
So, Ward,
Yeah.
congratulations, I'm all excited. I
Yeah.
don't ask questions or make comments at these kinds of events very often, so I want to go back to what I was saying, which was that for the first few months of the Hazrat Babajad school,
Yeah.
they heard beloved Baba's voice. And
Yeah, that's
then
right.
in July, they didn't hear his voice anymore.
Yeah, that's right. He was speaking. He was speaking in March of 1925. And yeah, and then his silence began, of course, on July 10th. Yeah. And at the time, nobody expected it to last the way it did. Yeah. So there's so much to say about Baba's work with the school, but I'll give like just a few details. Baba really, gave a lot of attention also, not just to academics, but to things like hygiene. The untouchables were really, downtrodden, and their hygiene was just terrible. I mean, they were filthy. Their clothes, their water, all this stuff. So Baba really, like for example, he gave all of the kids a water bottle and asked them to take it home and to drink only that water. Well, you can imagine why. They were all getting dysentery from the terrible water they were drinking. And he would also give food and things like he gave everybody little toothbrushes, or sticks is what they used. And then he would check, like, open up, see whether, because you give a kid a toothbrush and they haven't done it in their whole life and they don't want to do it, right? So Baba would check to see whether they had actually cleaned their teeth. And Baba would also give them baths, and would personally wash their clothes. He didn't even allow the mandali to do it at first. So there was real care for these kids. Okay, so I'm just going quickly because that's a huge story in itself. So that school was running for about 18 months or so. And then in November of 1926, Baba suddenly closed Meherabad down. He closed down the ashram. It was a big shock. It was a very big shock for all of them, because all these activities and institutions were going on, and all of a sudden he closed them. Baba had a way of doing this. He would, all these expectations, things were going great guns. Meher Baba's going to be famous. Look at all the excellent, philanthropic work he's doing, and suddenly he goes and he looks like a total flake to everybody, right? And he's the avatar. He's not doing, social work. and he was finished. And he was going to be gone, so this is the Hazrat Babajan school, right? He was going to be gone for 6 months, he was going to Persia, etc., etc. He wound up going to Lonavala in the mountains between Pune and Bombay, and then to Bombay, and then he suddenly came back. Nobody expected it, and was back at Meherabad, having closed. When he closed it down, he tore down half the buildings. The Mandali had put up all these structures, and Baba said, within 2 weeks, I want this to be torn down again. Can you imagine? I mean, these Mandali, man, they really got a training. Not just the work, but the humiliation of it all with their families and everybody who knew them. It's like, Meher Baba started a hospital, but then a year later he ended it. Well, the guy couldn't keep anything going. That's of course what they would, so they had to face all their friends who were, you know, saying all of that. The Westerners got a taste of it, and you LA people are to blame for this. When Baba said he was going to break his silence at the Hollywood Bowl, and everybody, they were buying their God realization dresses, and then Baba didn't do it. So they got their taste of the same thing. Everyone did who stayed with Baba. Anyway, he came back, and immediately it was clear. He started up the Hazrat Babajan school again. That continued throughout this period. So I won't say anything more about it, but that was there. But he wanted to have a more high-level school, higher grades, and also kind of a broad community of students from different places. So this is that early section of the book. These are two of the important players. Chuggan, have you heard of Chuggan, any of you? And Vishnu. These are giants among humanity, early Mandali. So here's Rausab again with a bunch of the kids. Here he is a third time. We put a lot of pictures because he's important. Up there is Bua Saheb, Baramji is his actual name, Bua Saheb. He was the boss of the school. Anyway, of the school I'm about to talk about. Baba wanted a real higher level school with more serious classes. The truth is, within Erengaon, there's just so far that he could ever go that way. You know, they just didn't have a background, they couldn't do more advanced things, most of them. So Baba wanted students from a wider geographic, range and a different linguistic range. So he started up, and these are two other institutions that he began almost concurrently. One of them was the Hazrat Babajan High School, right? That's different than the Hazrat Babajan School. The Hazrat Babajan High School, which was, you could say, where a lot of the formal classwork happened, most of it. And it was at the base of Meherabad Hill. For those of you who've been to Meherabad, you know where the road runs through between lower and upper Meherabad. Any of you been there recently?
No.
Why?
It's a highway.
It's a major highway. It's just Meherabad is trying to compete with LA. So it's a divided highway, and you go an underpass to cross it, and the railway tracks underpass. Well, it wasn't like that then. It was just a little tiny dirt road. But right on that road, he built some temporary classrooms for the Hazrat Babajan High School. And the Meher ashram students, which I'll come to, would take some of their classwork there. So they'd come down to actually get some formal instruction. And it had a regular curriculum, They got the equivalent of what you could say was accreditation. It wasn't not called that, but from Bombay University. And Baba had a lot of, good teachers, hired them. Some of them, a few were Mandali, a number more became Mandali after this, and there are a bunch of others who were there too, on various subjects. But what Baba really wanted was the Meher ashram. he wanted a select group where spiritual training would really be the focus. They got classes too, but he really wanted to focus on spiritual training. And Baba advertised this, his mandali, like in 20 major newspapers and magazines. This would be like, you know, the Indian version of the New York Times. Okay, India was not as prestigious as America was back in those days, but you know, the really well-known magazines and publications in India, of course, India, Pakistan were the same then, in Iran, and even in London. He was advertising a school for boys, 10 to 16, free education, non-denominational. They would learn, there's a real, we have some of these ads, there's a real emphasis on spirituality, but non-sectarian. People of all religions were welcome to come. Their food would be paid for, and their travel expenses would be paid for too, traveling to Meherabad and then back home again. So that opened on the 1st of May, 1927, right? So that's when the Meher Ashram opened. It had 10 students at first, and it very quickly grew. So the Meher Ashram is really the group that we're talking about. And then by about August or so, we're in 1927, you know, every year at Meherabad, there were huge sea changes. So 1927 was nothing like 1926. You know, in that history, it was so dynamic. But by August, it was really clear that the Meher Ashram was really Baba's focus. There was a lot of other things going on at Meherabad, but that was really, his eye was on that more than anything else. Let me say this about a lot of Baba's work appears to have been centered on the training of the mandali before that. I mean, they did all kinds of things, but he really gave a lot of talks to them and gave a lot of discipline to them. Well, it's really from this period, they kind of had to do their jobs. Baba was really focused on these kids. Of course, the mandali continued to get training. You couldn't fail to with Baba. But there was a definite shift in his focus, which was new. 1922 to 27 was kind of mandali centered, and after that it wasn't. And the women at this period, I don't know if you've read or heard that, I won't say they complained, because Mera would never complain, but they definitely missed Baba during this period because they hardly ever saw him. He was up the hill with the boys all the time. I always tell this story because it's so funny, but it was later in the Toka ashram where when Baba would go over, the women, he saw them then, in 1928, and he would go over to the women's side. And the boys wouldn't leave him. They're hanging all over him, and they would follow him over to the women's side. And the women were really complaining because they wanted to see Baba too. So this is just like Baba. It's so funny. Baba had a tug of war where the women pulled in one arm and the boys on the other. And whoever won would get their way. So the women won. Yeah. So the boys had to stop when Baba got to the women's. Isn't that just like Baba to resolve something like that way? Yeah.
I haven't been there in a long time. And which building is that today?
Okay, I'm coming right to that. That's Meher Retreat.
I know, but where is it today?
Yeah. So, yeah, this is on Meherabad Hill. So, Baba in June of 1927 moved, not the Hazrat Babajan High School, which was on the road, but he moved the Meher Ashram up the hill. And this is one of the, I don't know if you can see very well the laser pointer. Yeah. Anyway, right now there's a floor, they call it a first floor, we would call it a second floor, built on top of that. And on top of that, there's a tower.
Yeah.
You know that building with the tower?
Yeah.
This is it.
Wow.
And what this had been was built by the British. These had been water tanks. There were no doors there, so it stored water. And actually in June, the Mandali, and Baba did it too, they had to make these doors. I don't know, next time you go there, take a look at these walls. It's like that thick, you know. So it was really a job. And these turned into facilities for the Meherashram boys. Do you know the museum, some of you, the museum room?
Yeah.
It's the room facing the Samadhi,
Yeah.
right? That became a classroom. This room you see right there became a office. Bua Saheb, that is, who was the head of the Meherashram, Mandali, Bairamji was actually his name, Bairam Irani. He would work there. There was a dispensary there for medical assistance. It turned out to be important with all these crazy Persians and others experiencing the upper planes and needing care all the time. And this room on the right, it's called the East Room now. Later on, Mera and the other women stayed there in the 30s. But at this time, it was a dormitory for some of the Meherashram boys. And they had another dormitory. We have a map for it. I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but it's in the book. Oh, let me just say, since we see it, do you recognize this building?
No.
It's the Samadhi. That's what it looked like then. And they built it in 1927, and Ramju writes about it in Sobs and Throbs, and he says, we couldn't make head nor tails of this kooky place. It was a bit narrower than the Samadhi is now, and it had a wooden flooring and then a cavity, a crypt-like cavity underneath where Baba wound up sleeping. And so they called it the crypt room. Little did they know that it was going to become his tomb. They didn't know that at all at the time. So it was a really bizarre place. Of course, Baba did so many strange things already. It's not like they hadn't seen that before. Baba began giving his talks. Okay, let me preface this. Boys began to come in, and there were kind of almost equal numbers of Zoroastrians, Hindus, and Muslims. And in addition, Baidul, do you know Baidul, one of the Mandali? He was from Iran, Yazd, the city of Yazd in Iran. He brought a bunch of boys, 14 boys from Iran. I think 12 Zoroastrians and 2 Muslims. It was quite an accomplishment on his part. Getting them across the border without passports was a real trick, but he did it, actually. And a lot of them turned out to be major players. This boy, Abdullah Pakrawan, who I mentioned, came alone, independently. He was an orphan, but he came from Iran also, and he arrived a week later. So you had these different language groups there. So the classes were seemed to have been organized by language. And there was another dormitory, I don't know if you, the entrance to what's now the Samadhi is on that side. So over here, Baba built another dormitory room. In early September, Baba focused more and more on these kids. And also, he began to separate them from the outside world more and more. For one thing, they were up on Meherabad Hill, right? No electricity. The town of Ahmednagar was a sleepy little dinky place, I don't know, 40,000 people, 6 miles away. Erangan was a small village. At night, it would be completely dark. So they would, when they went down the hill to take classes in the Hazrat Babajan High School, remember that, right? Not the Hazrat Babajan School, high school. Baba increasingly, in fact, he put a rule at a certain point. They couldn't talk to the Hazrat Babajan High School kids. No conversing with them. So up on the hill, they wouldn't really have contact with much of anybody. The Mandali couldn't talk to them. Nobody could come in to this area on the top of the hill who wasn't there on school business. The teachers in the Mir ashram could talk to them in class, but not outside of class. And there are some management, the managing the dormitories and the food, they could talk to them, but only as it related to their duties. So you see, Baba was, this is what I think, he was creating this protective bubble around them. And this is, it seems obvious to me, the kind of experiences they had, they would not have been able to have it unless they were completely separated from the world. I think, in fact, the Mandalay couldn't touch them even. And, I think, let's remember, some of you may remember with Mera, men couldn't touch Mera, right? I bet you if you touched them, it could have shattered their capacity to have the experiences they had. This is what I think. But this was happening, you see, nobody knew what was going to come out of this. But then, towards November, so you have this very segregated, I don't like these words, segregated, isolated. What do we say? They're in this highly secluded, beautiful space. I mean, kids are going to be kids. I'm sure they were doing what all kids do. But there's a basic innocence about it. And then, they would be getting an education, but they're also getting spiritual instruction was going on also. Like they would, classes on Kabir or Muinuddin Chisti or Rumi or, these great masters and saints. So they're, for St. Francis, this would be part of their environment, thinking all the time. And also in this November, Baba started to fast. He fasted just on one single cup of coffee a day with milk in it. And you may know the story where the kid who brought it to him drank half of it. So Mera and all they were very shocked when they found out, because Mera would just be so, Baba fasting like that, you can imagine how she would have felt about that. 6 months, he fasted for 5.5 months actually, this way.
And word, also during this time, as we heard, from Espandior, Baba also had to deal with these kids' temperament. Some of them were homesick. The case of Espandior, he did not want to study at all.
Yeah.
This is in Meherabad, so not the Pram. And Baba had to give him, just really put him under a strict restriction that if you don't study with K. Khosrow Sahib, then I'll send you back. Yeah. And stuff. So he had to deal with kind of retraining them and calming them down, making them ready for all this material.
Yeah. I mean, he was dealing with a bunch of boys of that age. So I'm sure, in addition to what you're talking about, I'm sure there was all kinds of stuff going on. Obviously there was. But in addition, this was starting, as actually, since many of you met Svendiar, he's one of the few Prem Ashram boys to show up again. He was actually the very first to start having these kinds of experiences. But Baba himself was fast. Doesn't it seem to you guys to be related? Baba was fasting and basically hardly anybody could see him except this group. And the boys themselves were in this protected, beautiful space. It sure looks like these were part of the same work on Baba's part. looks like it to me. In addition, another thing started happening at this time. It's called the Sadak ashram. Sadak is a seeker, spiritual seeker. Baba had 5 of his young men disciples, and again, Baba indicated not circle members. It appears, you know Baba's circles, you've read about that. There are discourses on it, the circles of the perfect master and the avatar. And he had talked a lot about that in the previous 2 years. This seems to have been work with non-circle members, as best I can see. Anyway, these Sadak Ashram guys were not circle members. And from December 2nd, right, that's the first of these talks, right? When you get your book and tear off the plastic and whip it open to page 90 and following, you'll see the first talk is dated December 2nd. It was from that date that 5 of them went into seclusion in these little cabins. And the cabins, okay, this is Baba's Samadhi, right, today. It was called the Crypt Cabin. That was the name they called it by then. So it's up on this end of it. If you keep going that way, he had these little seclusion cabins built, and just big enough for one man to sit in. I guess maybe they could stretch out and sleep, I suppose. They did sleep. And they fasted on just milk. And so that was happening during the same time. And these 5 Sadak seekers started having very high order spiritual experiences at the same time. So look at this picture of what's going on. In fact, let me just jump to this. When some of the they became Premashram boys, started experiencing the planes, one of them I mentioned, Abdullah Pakrawan, Baba called him then Chota Baba, means little Baba, was experiencing the 6th plane. And Baba would sleep in this underground crypt cabin, and the back wall he had replaced by a little sheet. And Abdullah Pakrawan was sleeping there. And the diaries say Baba had never before allowed anyone to sleep almost in the same room with him, not even Gustaji, in fact. So get the picture, doesn't it seem symbolic? Here you have the God-realized Sadguru Avatar Meher Baba with a tiny sheet with a 6th plane kid on the 6th plane. Sure sounds symbolic to me, doesn't it? I mean, the things that were happening are just...
Where is he now?
Died.
Abdullah.
What's that?
What happened to Abdullah?
Yeah,
Abdullah Pakrawan?
yeah, he went back to Persia. Yeah.
Yeah, he died.
Yeah,
He was living in Bandar Abbas, Iran, and Esfandiar went to see him, and there's a story about him.
Yeah,
I don't want
beautiful
to talk
story
about
about
it.
that. Yeah.
So any of these kids became later on enlightened?
No. These are huge stories in their own right.
Yeah.
This book, The Boys,
The
does
boys
it?
has the information. The book,
Yeah.
The boys
Yeah.
has that information all written down.
That's a
Very
book.
interesting.
It's called The Boys.
And also in Globe International, there are a series of
Yeah.
articles about Abdullah Pakrawan that
Yeah.
I'm not sure I've read and so.
He was really the one-
So they did the translation.
He was the one who had the highest order experience, actually. No, it's very beautiful
But
and
later
very...
on it changed, but I don't want to talk
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah, I know, it's a very beautiful and very touching story, which I won't go into because it's really a full saga in its own right, yeah. But Baba, he left in 1929, he went back home, as did several of the others. So here you have these 5 sadaks, right? They're in their little meditation chambers and are being overpowered with... In fact, one of them just burst out of his cell one time and just began roaming around Upper Meherabad shouting, because he was having some, this kind of thing. So while this was going on with the kids, these sadhaks were there too. I'm not going to talk about them, but remember, they have this scene here on the top of the hill. So Baba began to give these talks in end of November, early December. And actually, the room where he started was not here. Oops, sorry. Unfortunately, I don't think you're going to be able to see this very well, but there's a map here. So when you get your copies of the book, you can whip it open to this page and see where we are. Okay, it's too small to see. Anyway, Baba was in, remember, the West Tank Room, right? Remember that building that's now Mayor Retreat with the tower, that room? Well, on the side facing the Samadhi, there's what's now the museum, if any of you remember that. Baba would go there, and all the boys would come in, and he would start giving these talks at night. It was night, like 7, and in India, in December, January, it's completely dark by then, pitch black. And usually the hour before, one of the mandali would have been talking on some spiritual subject like Hazrat Babajan or the poetry of Hafiz or something like that. And Baba would come in after, and he began this series of talks. And so the Creationist Causes, the 34 talks began there. And on December 20th, Baba moved and started to seclude himself in the crypt cabin, which we just saw. That's this room building here, which is now the Samadhi. And he would sleep down in the crypt. I mean, it sure sounds like symbolic stuff happening, doesn't it? Yeah. And he never left, and he would come to a window. You can sort of a little bit see a window there. In fact, there's a very nice, here, I'll go right to it. You can. This section of the book starts with it. Here it is. There's Baba at the window of the crypt cabin. And this is January 1928. This is the very period that he was giving those talks. So he would come to the window and discourse out it. So remember alphabet board, right? Yeah. And there was a platform outside of it. You could sort of see it a little bit in that earlier photo that we saw.
There must have been interpreter there as Baba was dictating, right?
Yeah.
For the kids to get it.
It's a pity, but we don't have any descriptions of how it was done. Mm-hmm. And that to me is kind of amazing. Can you imagine getting a bunch of, say, LA kids, boys, that age group, between 7 and 8, with translation going on into 3 or 4 different languages on subjects like this? I mean, if they didn't have a riot and kill each other, that would be a successful night. Well, there's not a mention of it. It apparently happened so seamlessly that no one even thought. I mean, Chanji's diaries are really full, but he never even talks about it. So a lot of that, we just have to presume. But I heard that Esfendiar said there was translation into...
Yeah, it's Afsari, Kekos
Right.
Ababedul always translated. That's the two key people he always talked about.
Okay, so we have that much. So there was translation into Persian, because remember there are these Persian boys were there. And it would seem that Baba discoursed in English, it would seem. There must have been someone reading the alphabet board and reading it out. And then there was also translation into, there must have been translation into Marathi and Gujarati also. And I don't know about Urdu. I think there were 3 groups, but there must have been some translation into Urdu going on too. Because there were a bunch of Muslim boys, they called them Moguls, from Bombay, like Ali was one of them, and they would have spoken Urdu. So if you can imagine, since there are no descriptions, I mean, I've been thinking about this for years and years and years, and it's so vivid to me, to my mind, but you're there, you're in this protected environment. These kids have been completely isolated from any worldly influence.
Yeah.
And Baba is so darn appealing, you know? And there's this stuff starting to happen there. It's at night. There's some sort of you can see the overhead thing, you see the overhead, you can see a little of the platform there that they were on. And Baba comes to the window, and when you go outside, there are stars overhead. And then Baba starts giving these mind-boggling, wondrous, visionary descriptions of things that you've never imagined before. Yeah.
So, Ward, do I have this right? All of those lectures were given by Baba from what we would now call the tomb.
From 20th of December they were. But from the 2nd of December to the 20th, they were given in what's now the museum room.
I see, okay. Yeah.
Those first ones were there.
Wow.
Yeah. But then but from the 20th of December, he was in seclusion, and hardly anybody saw him, except for people directly involved in this work. Yeah, so this is the scene going on. I'll show you some more of these. So there's Ali. When you get the book, you can look, or I can show you later the map. Here is, so from the 1st of December, as I mentioned, Chanji in his diary calls it a love craze. This love craze began. You see, in retrospect, we all know about it. But again, they had no idea what was coming, and it's like, what is happening here? And it got more and more and more. And then on January 1st, the whole place just went off like an atom bomb. And obviously something most extraordinary was happening from that point. And then the lectures kept going. And let me say this about the lectures too. They're not just random talks on topics. Have you read, any of you, the Tiffin lectures? Looked at those? Any of you guys? These are, was published a few years ago, but these are talks to the Mandali. Well, those were occasional. Baba would talk on whatever topic he wanted to talk about. They're not an organized series at all. These are. It's almost like Baba had a curriculum, right? And a syllabus. And it's organized, broadly speaking, around the divine theme. Baba did not use that phrase then, but from the 3rd lecture onward, he starts with the creation narrative, and then he gets on to evolution. He pretty well skipped reincarnation. He mentions it, and then the involutionary journey to God. So that's the broad organizational pattern. But the stuff he says about these things is really quite new, or quite startling, a lot of it. So that was this, it was a very carefully sequenced series of talks. And so Baba it appears that Baba didn't prepare notes beforehand, or I had wondered at one point, maybe Baba earlier in the day would dictate to a Mandali what he wanted to talk about, and then the Mandali would stand up and say it. It doesn't sound like that from the way Ramju describes it. It sounds like Baba was spontaneously speaking each day. So he would dictate, and a Mandali then, we don't know who, would read it, and then it would presumably get translated by Rasa Kakushu, into Persian, and then into Marathi, and into Gujarati. And once again, this is just my imagination, but thinking, I mean, how are young teens going to be able to sit there while it gets translated into other languages, you know? the typical group of LA kids that age would be rioting all through the whole process. Well, I think Baba was so fascinating to look at that they couldn't take their eyes off of him. And I'll bet you Baba would dictate and somebody would read, and then a translation, and Baba would be listening, making these gestures, following it. So it would keep it all in mind. So I think they were just totally absorbed the whole time. I mean, look, something was happening for them to react the way they did. And again, it's so amazing, it was a love reaction, because Baba wasn't talking about love except at the end of every talk. Okay, so this carries us up until January 14th, which is the end of this series of talks. And now, by the way, this book right here, again, you can't see it very well, but this part of the book, starting page 37, gives a basic, almost day-by-day chronology, because it didn't seem right to have blurbs at the start of each talk describing what was happening that day, because it would interrupt Baba's own sequence. But if you want to know what was happening day by day, correlated with the talks, you can jump back and forth between this section and that one. And it's very, very interesting. I mean, it was quite an eventful period. So then on the 14th of January, that's when the last talk was. But it's only it doesn't seem, in Chanji's diary, it looks like they were expecting Baba to go on. For the Persians here, your nationality is to blame, because it was Abdullah Pakrawan who spoiled it. He was up on the 6th plane, and he was in such a fragile state that Baba canceled the talk that night, because he could have died. He very easily could have died. And then that went on happening, and they wound up canceling talk after talk, and then it just ended. So we don't know for sure that Baba didn't have further talks in mind. He might have. There is nonetheless a kind of a completeness to the series as we have it. Yeah.
Or in the detail that you put together, one of the topic is about the drama of Ali and some of the events that led to closing the Meherabad. Can we cover that?
Yeah, very, very briefly, I'll say just a tiny bit, because these topics could take a whole weekend all by themselves, no doubt about it.
Right.
But it was, so the talks themselves end on January 14th, and it was right at that time that really the Prem Ashram came into existence. It was starting to happen, but there were certain boys who were so love mad that they just couldn't go to class anymore. They begged Baba just to be able to stay with him. All 3 of them did, to stay with Baba all the time. Abdullah Pakrawan was, here's a picture of him. We'll see what state he was in. He was just out of it. Yeah. See that? Isn't that something? I mean, he was experiencing the 6th plane, and he could easily have died, very easily.
But it's just the body that goes, right?
Huh?
And you say die, easily die. I'm just saying it was just his body that
Right.
would have gone.
He wouldn't have cared one little bit.
Yeah.
But Baba didn't want that to happen.
He was totally unconscious of his body.
Yeah.
But Baba would have cared. Baba had more work for him.
Oh, that's why I was curious. Why
Yeah, actually, Baba brought him down. You know how he did it? After about 2 weeks or so, January 24th, Baba gave him an enema. Isn't that interesting? And that dragged him down. And he started wailing, saying, "Oh, I don't want this. I don't. What is this I'm seeing? This world. I don't want this world. I just want my Baba. I want God." He was wailing and wailing because he was being brought down to gross consciousness again.
Wow.
He would have been great if he had dropped his body.
And I heard the word, I don't know where I read it, that he was taken to hospital for a couple of days.
Oh yeah, that was happening this whole period.
Yeah.
That's why Baba
Because he-
stopped the talks.
Yeah, it got
And-
complicated.
And he was the most dramatic case, but he wasn't the only one. Others started to have experiences. In fact, with Ali was really, he had some kind of a big role in all of this. And it's too much to go into here, but I'll just give you how Baba would work. He had been going to classes, and Baba started saying, Ali, you know, he's not much interested in me. He just wants to go back to his father. He just cares about his schoolwork. He doesn't care about love very much. And Baba would call him and send him away, and call him and send him away. And then when Baba said this one time, Ali just lost all control and began weeping completely uncontrollably to the point where it looked like he was going to die. You know, just this gasping where it looked like he was going to die, actually. So finally, Baba took him, and Baba pressed Baba's head against his chest, and he became completely silent.
Yeah.
And after a few minutes, they pulled his eyes, and his eyes were turned back. You could just see the white of his eyes. Yeah.
Is any difference this state with the masked state? What,
I can't quite hear.
the masked?
Is it like a must state, she's asking?
Yeah.
Majzubiyat.
Baba, yeah, no, Baba hadn't started his work with the must yet. But Baba, when he brought him back down to gross consciousness, it sounds like he was in the state of Solukiyat. That is, he was conscious of the God state and conscious of creation too. And Baba said that was higher. And now that's, we're getting very technical here, but a sadhak is different from a must. But broadly speaking, it's similar. And there are others who are in states that sound like they were something like the must states, yeah. We can get back to that, yeah. You see, nobody knew about must then, but Baba hadn't started that work yet.
Word, I think, anyway, so in Lord Meher about this part, 1920, you know, there's a quote from Baba that when he talks about Ali, and of course, you know, when Ali left first time, Baba cried, and then sent Mandavi to bring him back, and it was a whole drama, like you called it drama. It was a drama. Each time that his father would take him back, then Baba says, no, he has to come back or else I can't continue the work.
Yeah.
But Baba mentioned that the reason that I emphasize on Ali and his presence here in this ashram because he is linked to this work.
Yeah.
This is what I, written and I don't know how.
Sobs and throbs is really the source on that, yeah.
Is it, this is metaphoric, right? I mean, mystical is such mystical language.
This
You
is
don't
the
know
whole
what it
story of
means.
Ali, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, really the Sobs and Throbs is the definitive book on all of that. And all of this began right after these lectures ended, right then. Second half of January, this happened with Abdullah, and then Ali went into the state I just described, and he was in a state of oblivion for several days, and a bunch of the other boys were having such experiences. And we won't be able to go into it because it's too big a story, but some of the parents began to get all these stories about what was going on, particularly some of the Muslims. They're called Mughals, that was the name for this particular group. A lot of them are from Bombay, and they became and started dragging their kids back home. Very piteous, heartrending stories about this. It's something. And one of them, Ali, got dragged back to Bombay, and then he made this daring escape and came back. And
He wore a clothes like a girl.
yeah,
On vacation.
and
So
he
who
stole
pulled
some
his
money
ass?
from his dad's business, you know, and got paid for the train. And Baba was about to close down the whole Meher ashram, and he got back on the last day. So anyway, I just isn't time for it but it's a really amazing story. And the story of the Prem ashram will always be linked with that. Yeah?
Sorry, one more question. Does the book actually trace all these boys to where did they end up at?
This book doesn't, no.
Doesn't? No?
The book, The Boys, I gather, I haven't been able to get it yet. That does.
There is a book
I
about
think
them?
we have it in the bookstore.
Yes.
Yeah,
Is it The Boys?
The Boys,
Oh,
yeah.
Boys. I have that. So.
Okay. I haven't been able to buy it because I've been locked in India for 3 years. Yeah. No, this book doesn't. This book, I mean, if we did justice to all the things we're talking about, it would be 10 of these volumes.
Yeah.
It really
That's
would,
right.
you know. The period is, just the Sadhak ashram, I mentioned these 5 months, just that, good Lord, there's so much to say. There was so much going on that it boggles your mind. But anyway, to carry this story on very briefly to the end of so to me it seems obvious, a pattern in Baba's work with education, which you can only see in retrospect. He began with the most basic primary education with the poorest, many of them, the poorest kids, the most remedial kind of students you can imagine, many of them. Then he moved on to the Hazrat Babajan High School, an excellent school with more grades and a lot higher standards and much higher levels of instruction. Then he creates this Meher ashram, and he increasingly secludes them and protects them and spiritualizes the environment until they go love mad. And then you have certain people who get to the very brink of the realization of God. It looks to me like going from the most basic up to the most exalted. And when that was done, closed it and left it. That pattern emerges in retrospect. So a lot of this first section of the book gives you more of the history of that. So I'm just going very quickly, and I just have to skip over fascinating things. So the school, there was all these dramas going on with kids, you know, Ali and others being dragged home and making escapes, but the Meher ashram and the Prem ashram continued. And then in May, all of a sudden, Baba moved the ashram from Meherabad to Toka. Now, Toka is about 50 miles away, sort of north, and it's on the confluence of 2 rivers. And Ramju, in his book, said this. He said, when the drama with Ali was going on, at one point Baba said he was very displeased. It was Ali's father who kept dragging him away. This went on for, another whole year. But Baba said, it's been spoilt, I'll have to do it all over again. Baba said that. And Ramju feels that the Toka ashram was that, because he moved everything to this new place, like 500 people, and he did it in about 2 weeks. He had to have new buildings, and there Baba, he had broken his fast in May, in that month, but Baba began fasting again, and he created a Prem ashram with a separate building, and for about 6 weeks, basically Baba went into the Prem ashram building with those boys, and hardly anybody else ever saw him. Even the Mandali hardly did. And Ramju says this, there was of course this love, that whenever Baba would go anywhere, there were all these kids hanging on him all the time, and they're just mad. But the real new thing was meditation. there was a meditation madness that started, obsession, so that some of these boys would get up at 1 or 2 in the morning to meditate, you know, and would sleep only maybe an hour or 2 a night. And, you know, the doctors would check them. That's not enough sleep for kids that age, and they seemed fine. And so, again, you know, we don't know about Baba's universal work, but to talk like a fool about something I couldn't know, it looks like this would be phases in Baba's archetypal work, and a meditation phase will come sometime. That's what I think. You know, it's something for the future. And then in December, all of a sudden, you know, Baba would use these sort of ridiculous excuses for things. But anyway, on some excuse, he moved the ashram back to Meherabad, and it resumed there, the Meher ashram, and then in January he closed it. So that is basically, and then some of the Prem ashram boys stayed on, a few did. It was much less a school, although they had schooling, but it seems like Baba had special work with several of them, and several of them lingered on. In July, August, September, Abdullah Pakrawan and Ali and another boy, Ali Akbar, not Alaba, someone else, wound up accompanying Baba to Persia, and they stayed there. The story does indeed go on. That wasn't the end of it.
This is 1929, right?
1929.
That's Baba's first trip.
Yeah, so this period, 1925 to 1929, was Baba's concentrated work with education, schooling, is that. And these talks come right at the dead center of it, right at when the really dramatic things happen. I always love the story that, I think January 11th or so, I don't know if many of you know about Baba's mother, Shireen. She was definitely no nonsense and non-sentimental. So she went to the school, and she went up the hill, and she said, "Merog, get these boys to stop crying." Isn't that funny? Just like her. She didn't like that at all. So Baba sent her down the hill with her brother-in-law Masaji and said, "Keep her there." Okay, we have just a few minutes before lunch, but let me, I want to say a little bit about where we got all this material, because that is an important part. We've had a whole, some of you may know, is this the right one? Sorry, let me check. Yeah, this is the right one. Some of you may be acquainted with, over the last 20 years, a bunch of books have come out from the 1920s. Some of you may know the book In God's Hand. Here, this is, here I have images of these. Yeah.
Were these all in the trust? These images or various sources?
These photos? I got them a lot from, there are these two websites with photos. One of them, Meher Nazar, and another...
Meherabad Travels.
Yeah. I didn't get them from there.
That's newer. That's newer.
But Meher Nazar has...
The sort of the archives of photos, photo archives.
Yeah, they're not trust archives.
No.
The other is Baba's family. Yeah, here's Ramju, by the way.
Yeah.
Photos of him. And here, we haven't talked about Ghani much, but he's another big player, Abdul
Yeah.
Ghani. Yeah, so these are some of the books that have come to light. You know, when I came to Baba, we didn't know about any of this. None of this was invisible, in view. But starting in okay, I'll do this, see if this works again. The Elaine trick. Now, will my laser work? That's the question. No, it doesn't.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. Anyway, you can see the book Baba started writing on the 13th of July, 1925. Does anyone have any thoughts on what might have happened 3 days before that? Silence. So right after beginning his silence, Baba started writing the book, which has never surfaced yet. In God's Hand, it got published in the year 2000 and is 39 pages in Meherabad's handwriting. And then during this, in 1990, soon after Baba dropped his body, Baba had Balna II. Some of you know Balna II, I suppose. He wasn't living at Meherabad yet, although he did soon after that. But he was a frequent visitor. He was visiting, and Erich had him go to what's called the Rice Go Down, for which I have this photo here. That's one of the rooms in the back side at women's side at Meherabad. If you know Meherabad, Baba's house, the main bungalow, would be over on that side there. And we're looking from, broadly speaking, the direction of Mandalay Hall. Here's another photo of it right here from a bigger distance. Well, go down means storage room. So the rice go down was where they kept rice. And I don't know how Erich, he must have known something was there. But anyway, Bal found this briefcase, black briefcase, and brought it back to Erich. And it contained the manuscripts for, it's hard to see, I know, but Infinite Intelligence, Tiffin Lectures, and Creation and Its Causes. The manuscripts for those three
All
were
in that
there.
one? Oh,
Can you imagine if that had gotten lost?
Oh my God.
What would have been lost to humanity? I mean, it's mind-boggling. And my last 25 years has been working on this. So this is a brief image of these things. Let me see. Yeah, here's In God's Hand. This is what the book looks like. It's pages in Baba's own handwriting. All of these things are most interesting, and we could have whole weekends on any one of these. So this is what Baba's handwriting looks like. The book reproduces it in facsimile, actually. This is Infinite Intelligence, which came out in the year 2005. So this is one of those manuscripts. It's based on handwritten material. Here's what the, see on the left there, those are what the two volumes look like. They're bound, but handwritten volumes. And they look like this. The handwriting is very neat. It's what they call a fair copy.
And these are Baba's handwriting?
No.
He dictated and somebody took it?
Yeah, all this, we don't have a description of it, but I personally am completely convinced that this is a write-up of dictations Baba gave between March and about June, July 1926. And I could give the case for this. There's very strong evidence of this.
So we don't know who's...
We're not really sure. If anybody knows a handwriting specialist, some of us think it's probably Vishnu. We'd like to corroborate that. But it's not Baba, that's for sure.
Was it easy to read this handwriting and make interpretation on it and all that, editing?
Beautiful handwriting.
I mean, easy in terms, easy, I know, it wasn't easy. I mean, handwriting, was it easy to read all this handwriting?
Yeah, the handwriting was easy to read.
Yeah.
I mean, in doing these editions, we've edited and revised the language.
Okay.
Because the style of this, I mean, I can talk on this forever. This is the last 25 years of my life. The style of this is crazy, absolutely crazy. It's nobody's natural prose style. It's not an eccentric prose style, it's a highly artificial prose style. So, but in revising it, we tried to keep the meaning just the same, but to make it readable. So that's a huge topic in itself. So that was the first project there. The editors were Bao and Merwan Jessalwala and me. Merwan Jessalwala and I worked on this for years. The other, there are charts in it, so these are just pictures of that. The second item is called Tiffin Lectures, and this is based primarily on a typed manuscript. But in fact, we have diaries of Chanjis that were the source for the typed manuscript, sometimes several layers of them. Sometimes we have it in Gujarati, and then Chanji would translate it into English and all of that.
Did Merwan also work with you on
Yeah,
Tiffin Lectures?
yeah, we worked very intensively on this. So that was the second of them. And yeah, this is what the source book looks like. It's at Meherabad in the archive. Oh, it's in the archives right now. And the typing looks like that, you know.
Wow.
Nicely typed. Actually, the most important source was here in California. The Californians ripped it off.
Really?
Yeah, it was probably, you were better in the thick of it, Mahu. And Elaine,
Sounds like us.
two of you. It was actually with the Pearsons, so you were in cahoots with them. And they got it from Phyllis. And Baba had Adi send it to Phyllis. So that actually
So
turned
Baba
out...
was in the thick of it.
Huh?
No,
So Baba was in the thick of it.
Because Phyllis
Baba was
was
in the
doing
thick
the
of
Awakener magazine. Maybe that's why. She was the
Yeah,
big
so that's
editor
probably why he had
of
it
that
sent to
journal.
her.
Yeah.
So it was in, it turned out to be the most important copy because it was the copy with the words, Gujarati words filled in, and with the diagrams, which were missing from what we had.
So where is that copy now?
Oh,
They've sent it to the Trust Archives. It's on the way there.
Pearson's there.
But that was by far, that was one of these unbelievable discoveries when that turned up. And this is an example of Chanji's diary, which underlies the typed manuscript. Yeah. So I spent years and years and years.
Yeah.
Did you write this down, the process as you were doing it?
I didn't exactly, but in the supplement you'll see all sorts of information about it. Like there's one chart that shows the page in Tiffin Lectures and then all the source manuscripts that are relevant to it and the page numbers in it, things like that. And also on the Trust website you can see the source manuscripts, and if you go to the endnotes, each references a link and you can go to that page. So, I mean, this, you have no idea how much work this was.
That is huge amount of work.
That is.
It's not like anybody told us in
My God.
advance that these things were to be found there.
Were you ever disappointed or got cold feet while you were doing this work? Discouraged? No? You
I mean, it's
didn't
my
let
work.
that get on the way.
It's my work.
Born to write, you were
job.
born to do this.
Yeah, it's my work, it's my
That's your
work.
work.
And so the last, there are other books in process. This is the one Peter, Nardine, and I are working on right now, Combined Diary. This isn't by Baba, it's by the Mandali. But the last one is,
This is 1926, you said?
the Combined Diary runs from 24 to 27.
Oh, yeah.
But the last one is this one, and this gets us up to where we are today. So 34 talks between December 2nd, 1927 and January 14th, 1928, delivered by Meher Baba, first from the West Tank Room, right? Remember that? Now the museum.
Yes.
And subsequently from his crypt cabin in Upper Meherabad. And what is the crypt cabin today? Samadhi, yeah. It sure looks like symbolic, archetypal stuff going on, doesn't it?
Yeah.
To the Mir Ashram boys and assembled Meherabad community, sometimes others. There must have been some Mandali, and on certain occasions he called them all in. At the end of December, witnessed the eruption of love that brought about the Prem Ashram in early 1928. And the talks deal with primordial cosmology and the creation of the universe. They also provide detailed descriptions of the planes of consciousness.
Yes.
And here's what some of the sources look like. This is cover sheet for one of the manuscripts. I know it's hard to read. Shri's Explanations on Creation and the Universe, December 1927, January 1928. And it's typed. It's like this, with some handwritten supplementation, like that. That's a typical page. And we never found diaries behind it. This is all we had. But there are, this is another half page. I cut them into half so you can see them a little better. Looks like that. But there were 2 handwritten sources by Ramju. This is one of them. It seems to be based on the same material. It looks like the original diary was by Chanji and is lost, apparently. There's evidence for that. And this typed manuscript was created on the base of that. And these 2 handwritten manuscripts, this is another one by Ramju, appear to have been based on it also. So those were the primary sources used in creating this. And with that, we have hit noon.
Quite a bit. You covered a
And
lot.
so that's it for this morning. So this afternoon, we'll start getting into these talks themselves.
Very good.
Okay, bye.